Let's consider narratives for a second. I've been recently thinking about what a narrative is. Not so much of what the definition is, but the whole concept of a narrative has been kind of bugging me lately. I couldn't put my finger on it. There was something that I was missing. It wasn't until I was putting together my Rittenhouse video that I may have been just asking the wrong question regarding narratives. It was only then when I began to fill that void that was bugging me about the concept of a narrative. That question was, how much do facts matter in regards to driving or even creating a narrative? It's hard to really answer that because it has such a wide range of answers depending on the person or situation. When I began to think about it in terms like that, it led me to a much more tougher and honest question, I think not only for me, but for everyone. And that question is, how much proof does the average person need to be convinced that a narrative is believable? And by believable, I mean, enough for us to pay attention and ultimately form some kind of an opinion. It makes me wonder how important the believability is in relation to the amount of facts needed for one's genuine standard of humility and honesty. I originally thought that it had to do with how extreme or, rational the initial claim was. But these last 2 years have really proved that I've been completely wrong. This may be old news, and I'm sorry, but fuck it, just bear with me. When I first heard about the example that I'm about to bring up in a bit, I only heard some chit-chat about it. After a while, when I had the time to give it my attention, I sought out for what the original claim or narrative was. And yeah, I'm sorry, this might be a bit played out by now, but the whole Jussie Smollett thing.
Oh, come on, man.
Now, in order for me to believe a narrative or claim, I need to see some amount of evidence or information. It's hard to pin down an exact number, but I need to see something. I'm not being an asshole and saying something like, if I'm not there at the time it happened, then I will never believe it or something like that. Like I said, it just depends on the claim. I need something in order for me to even form some kind of an opinion.
Marvin, what do you make of all this?
Man, I don't even have an opinion.
Well, you gotta have an opinion.
But I will leave some room for the possibility that I may be a little bit misled or just flat out wrong for the sake of, I guess, being humble. Now, I do agree with the idea or concept of, innocent till proven guilty. In fact, I think it's a very vital principle for our free society. But this felt different. It felt more like an entire group of people were put on trial. A group that may have been convicted of thought crime or something. It felt like an entire demographic or even identity was already, predetermined to be guilty. And this was the proof needed to convict them or, make an example out of them.
The media that's saying it's a debate whether or not what just happened to Jussie Smollett is a hate crime. It's absurd. This isn't a debate.
You stupid.
This became a thing where if you showed any kind of objection to whatever the narrative was, the most annoyingly like compassionate person in the room would like snicker at you or like it was just bizarre. I'll be honest and say when I first heard this story or whatever, it sounded like the beginning of a really douchey CSI episode, like that special current event episode, you know what I'm saying? That episode where like out of nowhere there's like a trans Muslim woman illegal immigrant, and there's like, that guy of a certain race that might have voted for that one person, or maybe they oppress, or maybe they came from or are connected to that one day that happened on January, you know what I'm saying?
You're an anti-Semite. Stop spitting in my face like some kind of animal. Hey, don't you dare call me an animal. Are you trying to rip off my hijab? What? You all saw? An act of aggression. No different than Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people. She's a liar.
It had like all those theatrics, you know what I mean? Now, in order for me to believe something that on face value sounds like it came off from a script, I have to see or hear enough information in order for me to distinguish the difference between something that is fake and something that really happened. Then came this weird attitude towards any naysayers. They were usually portrayed as like total jerks because, they don't understand the bigger struggles that blah, 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 blah kind of stuff. It became this weird litmus test to see how, compassionate and understanding you are during your lunch break or something like that, It was odd to see people so convinced so quickly that this happened, and that approaching it from a more rational, let's wait to see how this unfolds kind of approach was looked at as being mean or misunderstanding. Ex facto, like they're just like Trump supporters, or they're like Trump or something like that. It's like this progressive 6 degrees of separation of Trump thing it's just weird. Which makes me ask, how much does a person like that need to see in order for them to get emotionally invested in a story? The type that will get at the very least the slightest bit of emotional regarding the story itself. Or does it even matter to a person like that, really? And oh my god, these fucking bad boys here. Like the fact that people even continue to take these people remotely seriously is beyond me. I can't fucking stress enough how, how dense and boring this kind of stuff is. You don't really need to follow any of these people if you don't follow it in the dorky way that people like me do. It's not only the fact that they have the same opinion, which is odd, but just notice the language or rhetoric that these people are using is just so hyperbolic, but yet they're so convinced. But damn, that was a great moment for people like me, the kinds of people that pay attention to this stuff the way we do. It was a chance for us to sort of just sit back and enjoy the bullshit be exposed. It was great to like revel in, you know, the idea that not only were we right then, but we were right now. I don't think there was anyone that went to bed not thinking, you know.
I gotta say it was a good day.
But I have to ask again, what the hell made those people that created those tweets so convinced? When I first started sort of following Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, what really interested me was his knowledge of hypnotism and what he calls the, you know, the power of persuasion.
Persuasion is about making somebody focus on your thing until they think it's important. Because the human brain is so dumb that it thinks whatever it pays attention to the most is the best.
Right.
Or the worst or the most important. But anyway, in their minds, its priority arises.
Right.
That led me to learn more about some of the general basics about persuasion and marketing. I'm not going to say I'm like a scholar or anything like that, but I did notice one very common tactic used was repetition. Hearing some ideas or phrases or, you know, being reminded of something over and over and over again does eventually influence people.
Dental plan.
Lisa needs braces.
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 Bullseye! Thanks a lot, Carl. Now I've lost my train of thought.
Dental plan.
Lisa needs braces.
Dental plan.
Lisa needs braces.
If we give up our dental plan, I'll have to pay for Lisa's braces!
Whenever this concept is brought up, people immediately have that image of that scene from Clockwork Orange, you know what I'm saying?
Stop it, please, I beg you!
And it's not entirely like that, it's rather extreme, but when you consider a couple of factors, it's not entirely that far off either. It just depends on how you look at it. When you consider the following: the rate and length of time it takes us to generally absorb information, how subtle the message is, the average person's attention span, the access of information we all have due to our cell phones, and how much memory the average person has. When you consider these factors, you realize how common the concept of repetition is in our daily lives. It's similar to how certain songs or jingles, you know, after repeatedly hearing them over and over and over again, they just sort of get stuck into our heads, you know?
I'm like a commercial jingle. At first it's a little irritating, then you hear it a few times, you're humming it in the shower. By the third date, it's by Mennen.
All right, George. I'll be honest. First time we went out, I found you very irritating. After seeing you a couple of times, you sort of got stuck in my head. Costanza.
We all look at our phones pretty regularly. I'm not trying to put anyone down. I'm including myself in this. This is an attempt to like browbeat anybody and like shake my fist at them.
Oh, you lousy Springfielder, you shake harder, boy!
When you look at a random person by themselves, odds are they're going to be on their phone, and vice versa. Odds are if you see me by myself, I'm probably going to be looking at my phone. It's just a thing we're just kind of growing accustomed to. We live in a very weirdly like media connected world right now, where we're on our phones and we go on the internet and follow like whatever social media things we follow. Then we go home and watch television that is like related to what we follow on our phones during the day. Like when you're on Facebook or whatever and you scroll down and you see an ad for a movie or a television show, you watch the trailer on YouTube and maybe you read a little bit about it and then you go home and watch it. You know what I mean? It's like this very small ongoing cycle that like just never ends. Like, when's the last time you went like a good 2 hours not media related? When's the last time you just sort of did nothing, like you enjoyed being bored or enjoyed doing something that the average person will see as boring, you know, whether it be like planting or you know, drawing or checking out art or something like that. When someone is being reminded of anything politics or current events related, how much information does that person get each time? Also, was it information that was given to them, meaning it came from like Facebook or, you know, YouTube recommended it, or NPR, or was it something that they genuinely searched for on their own? Now, when it comes to following these kind of like political, cultural kind of things, I follow things that go a little bit more into the details of the matter. Stuff that's a lot more long format based. People like me, we try to avoid narratives kind of like the plague, you know. I personally think they just sort of make people kind of stupid, if I'm being frank. It feels less about following the story and more about following other people's opinions. That's not the best way to go about these kind of things. Instead of forming your own opinion based on what you know about the subject matter, you just go based on what other people say. I don't go to just like, you know, my opinions are so right and they've been right since highschool.com/Facebook. I follow multiple sources, which gives me an opportunity to follow the story as it develops, which sounds a lot harder to do, but you just have to give it enough time to get into the groove of following it like that. Much like I would say following a sport. I don't mean like root for one team because you like how Dodger jerseys be matching with your Vans or whatever. I mean follow it like how a dorky sports fan follows these things. The average portrayal of like the quote-unquote sports guy is usually like a meathead.
Nerds! 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 Come on, Lewis, let's go. Nerds! 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 Nerds!
And there are sports guys like that, but true/dorky ones, they follow multiple teams, multiple athletes through a span of multiple years and see how like they get better or how they decline. And that's how people like me kind of follow this stuff. And like get into some kind of sport, it takes a while to pay enough attention to it in order for it to, you know, make sense. Part of the problem with this whole Jussie Smollett thing and other, you know, big stories is that it exposed that there are a lot of people that have a lot of cultural power or cultural influence that follow this stuff like that meathead sports guy. You know, they just root for one team. I think because it may be all they know. I'm not sure if it's a habit that they've picked up or maybe that they just had it within them all along. Either way, I honestly think that they, for the most part, are completely unaware that they do it. Or if they do, there's no reason for them to maybe reconsider a different approach to these kind of things. This was a greatest hits of all the narratives that people had been consuming for years, repeatedly. the racism in America narrative, the being gay in America narrative, you know, hate crimes, violent Trump supporters, all that like wrapped in a burrito smeared with like diarrhea and melted cheese and topped with a dollop of like virtue signaled flavored sour cream, all served by the wonderful people of Hollywood and the mainstream media. And that's the most embarrassing aspect of this whole Smollett thing, was the annoying combination of Hollywood and activism. But I'll get into that later. What happens as a result of people being so completely consumed with media that pushes out these narratives nonstop for God knows how long? Let's look at the race narrative, specifically the race narrative regarding the black community. This same narrative that they have been fed for years, nonstop, since they were kids to now, it's been the same.
What is structural racism? Structural racism is a system that gives white people advantages over black, indigenous, and people of color, like better access to education, wealth, and health care. It's what happens when society makes it normal for white people to have these advantages. It is the deepest and most common form of racism. All other kinds of racism stem from structural racism.
There are lots of eyes on this, so please just bring me some credible, admissible evidence.
When the black community is told consistently how horrible the country is towards them, and that there's something, within the fabric or the DNA of our Constitution that makes living in this country as a black person impossible, or like it's somewhat against them, whether it's the justice system or the school system, whatever, it's just there's something there that is perpetually going to be against the black community. Imagine growing up with that just constantly being shoved down your throat and never offering some kind of a counter. In fact, people that go against this narrative and challenge it, or just simply offer a different viewpoint, they're usually going to be either ignored or smeared as racist or sellout Uncle Toms, you name it.
Please welcome my one black friend, Candace Owens.
Martin Luther King would have voted for Trump.
That's the joke.
You suck, McBain!
Now my Woody Allen impression.
Like, what do you think this is going to do to people? How in the hell can anyone think that they are genuinely helping by doing that? By repeating this narrative over and over and over again and never offering any kind of counterpoint. Now, to save time, I'll just refer to people that do a great job of explaining the effects of this. People like Coleman Hughes, or one of my favorites is John McWhorter.
Why in the world would I say that anti-racism is a problem? Because, of course, no, it's not a problem to not be a racist. And I don't think any of us would be here if we thought the debate was over that. So, of course, you don't want to be a racist. Racism is bad. We know that. But what about the more complex and therefore more interesting issues? If you're a good anti-racist, then you're thinking about the cops that kill black men in these scenes that we know about. But you're not supposed to think about the fact that so much more murder happens to men like that in their own neighborhoods. You're supposed to think of that as maybe connected to racism in some abstract way, but you're not supposed to think about it You're not supposed to think about all of those homicides. Every summer in big cities across America, teenage black boys are killing one another in the hundreds over frankly nothing. That's somehow less important than what the occasional rogue cop does. That's modern anti-racism for you. That's backwards. Another example, education. To be an anti-racist is to pay attention to the idea that universities must foster diversity. The idea being that supposedly universities wouldn't want to foster this diversity if they weren't made to do so. Now, what that means is that often this diversity is fostered as the result of creating a different evaluation system for Black and often Latino students in terms of grades and test scores. Now, there are various studies that show that that often is not the best thing. And so Stephen Cole and Eleanor Barber did a paper where, contrary to their expectations, it showed that when students are mismatched to a university, it discourages them from getting PhDs. There have been many studies of that kind, but we're told to look away from them.
Similar to like the homophobia narrative, you know? How do you think you're helping by repeating a very similar narrative to someone nonstop and smear anyone that goes against the grain as, like, you know, part of the problem? I'll go more in depth with this in a later video, but to keep it short, this constant need to push these narratives will have an effect on people. It'll affect how they process things. It will eventually, in a way, sort of, you know, warp their sense of reality. Couple this with all these reports of, you know, hate crimes. Again, just reports, not follow-ups to them. Just hearing about a report about a hate crime. Hearing about them, but not following how they develop. Because I hate to break it to a lot of people, but a lot of them do end up being complete bullshit.
18-year-old Yasmin Saweed recounting the ugly attack Thursday night. It was around 10 p.m. when the college student jumped on the 6 train to head home to New Hyde Park when she noticed 3 young men on the car.
As they got closer, they were like, "Take that rag off your head." One of them reached for my hijab from the back and tried to pull it off, but I put my hand on top of my head so that it wouldn't fall off.
Few moments later.
Police say that a Muslim teen made up a story about being verbally attacked on a New York City subway. Yasmin Saweed claimed that a group of drunk men yelled at her and tried to tear off her hijab. Here you see her in court, her head shaved. It turns out that she, in fact, admitted to making up that story.
The FBI was called in to assist after swastikas kept appearing on a message board, similar to a dry erase board, on the door of a female student, she is Jewish, who lived in Mitchell Hall. Now the university confirms that a hidden camera placed in the hallway confirmed the student who was the apparent victim did it herself.
The words "kill the gay" written on a lesbian couple's garage door brought the full weight of the FBI to the investigation of a possible hate crime.
5 minutes later.
Months ago, those 2 women were brought down here to FBI headquarters. They passed through this gate behind me and were taken inside, where they were given a test to determine whether or not they had spray paint residue on their palms. They were also given a chance to take a lie detector test, which I'm told they declined. The women say at that point they knew the focus of this investigation had changed from their neighbors to them. Now, because the FBI does not believe this was a federal hate crime, the charges were brought by Arapahoe County. Both women are charged tonight with 2 counts of criminal mischief and 2 counts of false reporting.
There is also the reality that some stories will get more press than others. There is media selection bias here. When people deny that there is a bias in media, I think they primarily think in terms of just news and think that because Fox News is in existence, that sort of balances things out. But it really kind of goes beyond that. Let's leave the news out of it for a second, okay? What about just general mainstream media? When I'm talking about mainstream media, I'm talking about things like television, movies, radio, Facebook, Twitter, things that have big culture, big cultural institutions like that. Like, let's consider the subject of abortion, for example. Can you honestly think of a time where you're watching something like a television show and the subject of abortion is presented. Let's say it's like a special episode of that show. This isn't a pro-choice or pro-life argument I'm presenting. It's just to make a point. But can you think of any time where the pro-life side of the argument was not portrayed as, you know, sexist or backwards thinking or anything like that? Like, it presented it in a very fair way, in a way that was even somewhat kind of convincing. I think at the very best you probably came up with like maybe one example, probably, but compare that to the countless times where it was the opposite, where the pro-choice side was right, and in a lot of instances that I've seen portrayed as, like, you know, kind of like righteous. I'm guessing if you compare that, it's pretty one-sided, don't you think? Odds are that the messaging that the average person gets through just general mainstream media is going to be really, really one-sided. It is going to predominantly lean one side of the aisle, and that dominance has become a huge problem. A problem that the general person doesn't want to admit. What do you think the people that put this stuff into their programming are doing to their audience? Just regular people. People that are just trying to just watch something and enjoy it. There's a word for that. And not gonna really say what it is, but I think you might be able to piece it together in your head. I guess I'll just, you know, give you a hint. It's what happens when you combine marketing and politics. You know, can you think of what that is? The problem isn't just the media as like just one big entity. The problem for the most part is with the people that continue to rely on it so much as like this bastion of truth and standards. As I stated before in my Rittenhouse video, this is only going to condition people to prioritize narratives or just like storylines above objective truth. I don't want to make this video too long, and I'll go more into this into a future video, but let's just move on. What these last 2 years or so have really taught me is that to a lot of people, narratives matter more, and this case was sort of like a confirmation of that. A lot of people were on the tip of like, well, at the very least it spreads awareness of hate crimes or whatever the fuck. It shows that, you know, the MAGA movement is so violent and hateful, and this is coming from an establishment media that ignored, excused, and even promoted violence that came from the Black Lives Matter movement and Antifa movement. But that's the subject for a whole other video series. So let's kind of just move on. But this attempt to make a martyr out of Jussie Smollett is, I don't even know how else to say it, but just embarrassing.
Even if it was a hoax, this is really happening all the time. And even if it was a hoax for the sake of bringing attention to this, then I'm like, that's low-key noble.
What did you say?
And even if it was a hoax for the sake of bringing attention to this, then I'm like, that's low-key noble.
Oh! Oh, no, she didn't! Oh, yes, she did! No, she didn't! Yes, she did! No, she didn't! Yes, she did, Peter! I just saw it!
It takes a lot of, I don't know, ego to genuinely think like this. Like, it's odd to see, like, just absolutely not have it in them at all to say, you know what, I'm wrong. Yeah, fuck him. Or, you know, maybe the narrative that I've been holding on to isn't what it seems, but instead it's this kind of shit. Again, this isn't like some weird far left or far right internet website thing, some subreddit thing. This is mainstream daytime television targeted at like moms, conditioning them to say things like, well, I mean, those facts, yeah, but it doesn't matter because like racism in America or some shit like that. It makes people think that asking for basic follow-up questions don't matter because it diverts from the, you know, grander story or narrative. They're going to be driven more by what they heard versus what they have confirmed. It's generally retarded and actually just flat out very manipulative. It's to the point where you hear people literally spewing out the same phrases and words, like how people quote, you know, Simpsons or Seinfeld or something like that.
As actors, it is our responsibility to read the newspapers and then say what we read on television like it's our own opinion. Matt Damon.
But the one aspect of this whole Smollett thing that is just annoying is this right here. Look at his face at this part.
I come really, really hard against 45.
He's having fun with this. It's this trend I've noticed over the years of like, you know, making activism hip and trendy and fun. This behavior is going to turn anyone into a little fucking monster. I guarantee you that the people that like work under him, like interns and people that just like, you know, lighting fixture people, can't fucking stand him. They'll probably tell you that he's like a brat. I went to college with people like that and they are fucking terrible. They are genuinely just awful people. Like, they're snobby, they're mean, and to some degrees, a lot of them, they kind of up that kind of activist nonsense because they're very, in reality, extremely uninteresting people. They think very, very one-dimensionally, and I would say for the most part they're just flat out not worth your time, but different strokes, different folks, I guess. Again, this whole thing of making activism like hip and trendy and cool or whatever, it's something I'll have to probably save for another video because that's a pretty big problem. But just to keep it simple, when activism becomes trendy like that, it doesn't really lead to very good things. But again, I'll save that for a future video. Lastly, there are things that we can all benefit from after this whole dog shit. It convinces so much people to not take the media and the people that are so devoted to it even remotely seriously. From the preachy shit for brains celebrities that just consistently embarrass themselves, spewing out whatever like social justice nonsense, to most, if not all, big news outlets, you know, from television to newspapers, but also to that insufferable relative or friend of a friend and is just back from school and is just spewing out just complete utter nonsense that like majored in gender studies or ethnic studies or some humanities shit and also wants to like become a public school teacher at the same time. It convinces so much people to just not take those types seriously at all, when you can literally just hear the script that people are spewing out, like the phrases, the same couple lines, you know. It's a beacon to let you know that this person shouldn't be taken seriously because they have no idea what they're saying. Now, when it comes to this kind of stuff, how we go about dealing with that from now on It's something I do not have the answer to. I mean, just like you, I'm searching for ways to improve that. It is going to be a pretty long process, but if we continue to at least have these kind of conversations and delve more into these kind of into the sort of subject matter and voice our very fair concerns, and I mean, you know, have these conversations amongst ourselves, you know what I mean, it'll only benefit everyone. When it comes to getting this kind of stuff from mainstream outlets, I think those days are just dead. It has not only exposed that it's all bullshit, but it makes us wonder what else is bullshit and how long has it been bullshit. And with smaller outlets, you know, ranging from people like Tim Pool, Crowder, even lesser, smaller ones, we'll get our news and we'll get our kind of information regarding stuff like this from them. If I want to look into any kind of controversial topic, I'll check out a smaller source any day of the week, because it'll be a longer format and it'll at least be a lot more genuine. I'd rather listen to John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry have a long format discussion on race rather than get preached to by the annoying spinsters of Sex and the City.
I don't understand why you're questioning her identity.
I'm not questioning her identity. I'm waiting for her to show me her ID.
Well, it's interesting, because you barely glanced at mine when I went through. Could I have your name?
No.
Here it is, here it is.
Thank you. Come on through, Professor Wallace.
Hi. I just had to say something.
Did you?
Excuse me?
Did you have to say something?
Oh. One of the important takeaways I got from How to Be an Anti-Racist is if you see something, you have to speak on it. You have to call it out.
Anyways, guys, that's my video. I hope this wasn't too long and I tried to stay on subject as much as I can. Anyways, if you like the video, please like, share, and subscribe. In the future, I'm going to be having some other kind of channels set up, preferably kind of like a music channel and art channel, so you can support me through there. I'm going to have some merch made soon, t-shirts and pins and things like that. And I'm also going to set up a Patreon soon. Just leave it at that. All right, bye.